Hey, good morning, YouTube. Welcome to today's live stream of the Editing Bard writing tips that make sense. Super excited to have you guys joining me today. Super excited about the questions that I have to go over. So really, there's no time to waste. If you guys have any additional questions that you want me to answer over the course of the live stream, make sure that you post them over in the comments section. I do take the questions live. So super excited to get into today's questions. All right, starting with the first one, I got this. It says, what are you doing now to ensure you continue to grow and develop as a writer? So this really applies in a lot of ways. And it's a little general. Gosh. So one of the first things that you need to be doing is you need to actually be writing. Like, I can't begin to tell you guys like how important it is to just write. That's one of the biggest things that you're going to do in order to be able to improve yourself, improve your style, learn your voice, all of these kinds of things. It's kind of dark. It doesn't really help that much, does it? All right, fail. Plus it gets in the glasses. Anyway, so in addition to writing, you also need to be reading. You need to be reading a lot. I mean, not everybody has that amount of time, and I understand that. But if you're going to be writing fantasy, sci-fi, romance, thrillers, then you do need to have a general concept of what each of those genres are like, what they need to sound like, what they need to feel like. You can always take writing classes. So I haven't taken a writing class. So full disclosure there. But from the people that I know that have taken creative writing classes, they're more academic, right? So you're dealing with stuff that is more strict, I guess would kind of be the word that I would go for. That doesn't really fit with how I write. I don't do good with academic, pretty much anything, just because I don't enjoy it. Let's see. Ensure you grow and develop as a writer. I mean, those would be the three main things, right? So you're writing consistently. You are developing your own writing process, which is super important. And I actually have some videos that I'm currently working on that talk about how to create your own writing process using the methods that I've come to develop over the last couple of years that have really helped. You're reading in the genre that you want to write. If there's a genre that you want to write in and you've never done it before, you simply go and you learn by reading. YouTube videos, right? There's a reason why you're here, but you're looking for people who are going over, like, what are the most common tropes? What are the most common plots? What are cliches? What are best world building tips? Like, these are the different kinds of things that you can continue to do that are fairly easy and straightforward to develop your writing and expand your skill set. So like I'm doing a ton of research in between these live streams on world building, mainly because I'm doing a video series on that coming in the next couple months. So I'm learning about world building, fantasy maps, how to draw them more effectively. I'm learning about character tropes. I mean, I know a lot of the character tropes, but it doesn't hurt to hear someone else's opinion, because I don't know everything. Like, in spite of how big my head is, like, it's not full of that much stuff. And so I'm trying to learn and improve my own writing, so that way I can help you guys improve your writing. So that's kind of what my suggestions would be in regards to this subject and to this question is never stop learning. You always need to be growing and expanding your craft and really seeking to stretch yourself. If you feel like you're uncomfortable with writing a certain way, try and push yourself past that discomfort. Like I did that when I had a hard time killing off characters. And now I have zero problem killing off characters. Ask the people on Wattpad who have read my stuff. They know I murder characters indiscriminately. That's why I have the title Slayer of Innocent Characters. It is a well-earned title, but I used to be really uncomfortable with addressing that kind of stuff. So that really kind of helped me push past it. So those would be my suggestions for this, or for that question. Moving on to the next question. It is, how hard is it to write a book 120,000 words in length? Hard is a little relative, because everybody's at a different skill level. I would say that it is not hard to write a 125,000 or 120,000 word novel if A, you have a writing process, and B, you have a story big enough to fill it. Some stories just simply aren't that big. I'm writing a fantasy novel right now that, with the second draft, is probably going to end up around 75, maybe 100. And this is book 1 of 12. You may have heard me say book 1 of 11. Well, my son's drawing of a squiggly squid-like creature has inspired book 12. So I've now added that to my plate for the series. But you want to develop a writing process. You need to know what you're able to write. Okay, so when you do that, you need to schedule time, because it's super important. You need to have a writing process. You need to know how many words an hour you can type, because that allows you to know effectively how much you're going to be able to write in that block of time that you have. You're going to need to know how long you're going to take to write it. 120,000 word novel, my recommendation would be 6 to 8 months, planning on 6 to 8 months to write that. If you have lots of time, you can shorten it. But I have a job, most people have a job, and they're trying to do this, they're trying to do their writing on the side of their job. 6 to 8 months is actually fairly realistic to get a novel of that size pumped out. Because what that is going to allow you to do is going to allow you to figure out your words per day. I don't know the exact math on that, but if you are taking, that 120,000 and dividing it by 6 months, you're going to get your word count per day, and it allows it to be much more manageable. So even if you're writing, 400, 500, 600 words a day, or you're scheduling time 2-3 days out of the week, that you set aside a block of time to do that, then you're going to be setting yourself up for success in writing that novel. And it's actually not going to be that hard. The other thing that you can use is Write Track. It's a tool that you can, most people use for NaNoWriMo. I've used it. That was one of the reasons why I was able to bust out 50,000 words in January, was because I had used the math that they had. So you could go in and put your writing goal of 120,000 and put the time span when you're starting it and when you're going to end it. And it calculates all of this out for you. How many words per day do you need to write? And then it does it for every single day. I am going to, as part of the writing process videos that I'm currently producing, have a Write Track, very brief Write Track tutorial to show you guys how to do that. So that should be coming in the next couple months. Again, it's kind of going back and forth. My ability to produce videos largely depends on time to edit the videos, and it's sparingly. So, but I do have that in the works, and it's very, very easy to do. It's very user friendly. You could probably go and test it out. As a matter of fact, I actually have a link down in the show notes to Write Track, so you can check it out, play with it. Very easy, very straightforward to use. So is it hard to write 120,000 word novel? No, it's not. Aside from having a writing process, you need to have the story big enough to warrant that size. That size novel is typically going to be edging on epic fantasy. You aren't going to see many books that size as being traditionally published on the front end. You maybe you're, as a second book, you could probably get away with it. My understanding is that the publishers, they don't like taking a risk on a book that big. This might not be all of them, but it just, as a general line or a baseline, that's kind of what they're looking for. They're not looking for a book that big. They'll probably cut it down to maybe 75,000, 50,000 words. So just be aware of that. If you're planning on writing a book that big, you're probably going to be ending up self-publishing it. And again, the story has to be big enough to fit that. Otherwise, you're just going to have a lot of filler stuff, and it's not going to make sense. And you're going to end up with like an Aragon type book that is just obscenely long for, in what is my opinion, no real reason. Like, I've read Aragon. I was obsessed with Aragon. Didn't like that basically plagiarized most of Lord of the Rings names, but it was just a really long book. There was times where I was just trudging through and I'm like, are we going to get there anytime today? Like, yep, nope, still reading. So make sure that the story warrants it. Again, it's probably going to be more of like epic fantasy. You could probably do space opera. But usually you're going to end up with like epic fantasy. Now, once you get to be like Brandon Sanderson size, you can write, 500,000 word novels and no one's going to bat an eye. So it's not to say that you can't get them published traditionally. It's just that you have to earn that more often than not. All right, so let's move on to our next question here. And it's kind of along the same lines, actually. It's like, would it be better to write a trilogy over a much longer series? Or it might have been a misspelling, or a much longer series. I think that's what they were trying to ask. Yeah, the sequels I felt were worse. In terms of that, lengthwise, Eldest is really where I had my biggest issues. Eldest was just so unbelievably long, and like I remember just getting to the trying to get to the dwarves in the mountain, and it was describing like the city in the middle of this extinct volcano, and they're having to fly up and up and up and up and up, and then the air is getting so cold they're losing oxygen, and they dive in. It was too much. It was way too much. So now, in terms of trilogy or writing a much longer series, again, the story has to warrant it. A lot of that revolves around world building. Like if you're world building effectively, then you probably will have enough stuff for a story. So here's an example for this. So I have been working on my fantasy. It started off as a fantasy trilogy, right? So started off that writing when I was 17. And it's grown now because I've reworked the plot like 5 different times to the point where it's now a much bigger narrative. But that's 13 years of working and world building on this thing, and trying out different things, experimenting with different things, to really flesh this world out. And a lot of it's only coming together in the last year. It wasn't until I had started writing my fantasy novel this year that it actually tied together all of the pieces. And now I'm ending up with a 12-book series that is going to primarily follow, excuse me, primarily follow a single character, whose life is affecting all of these other characters. So, you know, you have to do what's right for your story. And typically, the problem that I run into with a lot of authors is that they have write-a-series-itis, and it's a very deadly disease for writers, because basically they want to write a series. It makes them want to write a series so bad that they'll save all the cool stuff for the rest of the series, and the book one is just kind of get to the series. And so write-a-series-itis is very, very difficult, you know, to overcome. And you got to really plan and be purposeful if you're going to write a series. You have to give somebody a lot of the cool stuff in the first book, because otherwise they're not going to pick up the next book. They're just not. If you're writing a book with the sole intent of getting to the cool stuff in the series, every reader out there is going to pick up on that, and they're not going to pick up the book again, because that first book sets the expectations for each subsequent book. And if you're not delivering on the cool stuff, the flashy stuff in this first book, then you're not going to keep readers interested. It's as simple as that. So if you have a story and you believe that you could turn it into a trilogy, then you need to map out where you want the story to go through all 3 books before you write the first book. Because you have to know, A, how it all ties together, B, how to keep the readers interested and engaged, what kind of plot twists are you going to incorporate along the way. Some of these things you're not going to know until you start writing, and that's okay. So I would recommend you use what I call the milestone method. And this is the method that I reverse engineered for myself earlier this year, that has been really effective in helping authors get the big picture of their book. So you draw a horizontal line, and then you make marks at the beginning, the middle, and the end. And then you write what your inciting incident is above that. You write what your pivot point is that takes you towards the end, and then you write how you want to end it. Then you go back through and you're like, okay, well, what big events do I want to have take place over the course of this book? You make little alternating tick marks along that line on both sides, and then you write the big events. You don't go into detail about what happens in those events. You don't spend 15 minutes writing down the synopsis for those. These are waypoints. These are markers. That is all that they are designed to be. Do not spend a lot of time trying to figure out how to make them work, because honestly, you're going to change it by the time that you get there anyway. This is why, to me, outlining isn't super effective, and this allows for some more fluidity, because it's not set in stone. Aside from the stone being in the name, it's not set in stone. Okay, it's a waypoint. It's to guide you through the story. Everything between those, I mean, you could have 20 chapters in between the inciting incident and the first waypoint. It doesn't matter. Point is you have it on there, and if you get to a waypoint before, or you've hit that milestone and it was like, oh, that's just supposed to happen later, but it's happened sooner, then you just you just erase it, put it to where you're at now, and then figure out a new milestone. It allows you to transition and to fix things as you go, versus having spent all this time being like, oh my gosh, now I'm committed to this because I've already written it out and I've already done all this stuff. And it's like, don't do that to yourself. When you're writing a trilogy or a series, it's going to change. The series that I started 12 years ago has changed drastically in what its tone's going to be, in the concept, and how I plan on ending it. And now that I've learned this milestone method and really started using it, it's part of one of my worksheets, which you can get for free, by the way. If you want to do this for your book, link down in the show notes to my website. And if you subscribe to get information on like the updates when I do the blog and stuff like that, then you get 3 of the worksheets for free. You get the brainstorming worksheet, you get the outlining worksheet, and you get the character builder worksheet. So if you want to learn how to do that more effectively, I recommend getting those. They're free. I mean, if you want to pay me money for them, then you can. You just go to the store, but just get them for free. Just do it. So that's how you set up a series. Okay, that's how you plan these big, long series of books. Is you have to know the big picture, and you stay at that big picture using the milestone method. And you do this for every single book. If I had, I'll just do it right now. It's not like you're not incompetent, but I'm more of a visual person. And so, hopefully this will help you guys. I don't know if you can see that. Kind of, maybe, sort of. There we go. All right, just had to block my face out of it. The light was reflecting off of my head. So you have your beginning. Oh, there it goes again. Beginning, middle, end. Boy, this is just not working at all. There it is. And then you have those tick marks that go through, and those are your big events, right? So you write what your inciting incident is, the pivot point, which is in the middle, and then how you're going to end it. And then you leave those little tick marks there. Ideally, if you have a whiteboard, like that will be a lifesaver for you. That's that's how I do it. I have a whiteboard over there and behind the laptop actually, to where I can do this for my story, right? I can lay out the entire story from beginning to end and how I want to do it. So keep that in mind. Use that. I think that you'll find it very, very helpful in planning out either a trilogy or a series. Because if you do it and you're just like, yeah, the story ends in one book, it's okay to do it in one book. You might get an idea later where it can turn into a trilogy. But for right now, make sure you write a really good first book. Don't worry about writing a great trilogy. Write about writing a really good first book. And then everything else will kind of come from that. Okay, moving on. This one I'm super excited about. How do I make a character badass without making them seem horrible? So I love badass characters. Okay. It is one of my favorite types of characters to write. And this is essentially kind of how Udar, one of my main characters in my both in my fan fiction series and my fantasy novel, that's essentially kind of their personality, his personality. He's a badass, but he's not a. Let's define badass, okay? Because it could be you could be a badass fighter, you could just be a bad boy or a bad girl, or you're just a dick, right? So it's going to fall into probably one of those three categories. I like the badass characters who are trained, who are extremely competent, but they have a personality of an angry wombat. So that they mean business, that they can whoop you, but like deep down beneath the crusty surface, there's really a lovable person. Like those are the kinds of badass characters that I like to write, because I feel like it's more realistic. No one is just, well, I shouldn't say no one. The vast majority of people are not heartless jerks, while also being extremely competent at a lot of things. So to write a badass character without them being horrible, you need to give them some sort of weakness, some sort of trying to find the right word here, a softness, right? That doesn't come out very often. But when it does, it's memorable and it's engaging. And it still fits within the character. So, like for example, Udar is a extremely competent swordsman. He has the personality of an angry wombat because he's lived through a lot of things. So, I mean, he's a total badass, but he is at his core very soft and loving, and he loves deeply. But because he loves deeply, he puts on this gruff exterior. And I feel like the gruff exterior is kind of how we protect ourselves, right? If we don't want someone to get close to us, we put our arms out here. And that's essentially what the most badass characters do, I feel like, is they put their arms out here and they say, you can't get any closer to me. And then over the course of the story, you see that kind of, they start letting people in a little bit more at a time until you finally get to who they are as an individual. So you get past that crusty exterior. Now you can have somebody who's just a cocky jerk, and those types of characters have their place. I have, this was more so a couple of videos ago, I talked about the Texties stories that I'm doing, and it was full of tropes. And I have a guy he's the cocky, badass zombie killer, and he is a jerk, and like really kind of like no one likes him. But over the course of the series, he does change, because I write characters like that. But if you want to keep somebody just a cocky jerk, then they need to not care about anyone but themselves. They need to be super narcissistic. They love self. They love them. They're out for them. They don't care how many bodies they have to step over. And so that's kind of how you write, like, but you make them super competent in something. So like for his name's Corbin. He's like an expert marksman with pretty much any kind of gun you give him. So if you're going to have a badass character, then you need to give them something that they are extremely competent in, that really no one else is competent in, at least not to that same level, because that makes them cocky. That's what gives them that nature. Is like, there's another character, for example, he's from a vampire trilogy that I was writing with a friend of mine. His name is Dax, and was it Dax? No, that's from Texas. Jax. I named him Jax. And he's a badass character because he can kill vampires like nobody's business, and it's because he's half vampire. So he's a little bit stronger. He can still get injured, but he recovers faster. And people don't want to mess with him. That's part of how you incorporate that, how you make them badass, is that everyone needs to be intimidated by them, right? So, if you walk into a room and you're just like, oh, that guy or that girl, like, I don't, and everybody else is like avoiding them, no one wants to pick a fight with them, that usually means that they're competent in something, and they're going to whoop you. They're going to be a badass character. It's hard for some of these things because I'm using a lot of what my definition of it is, because that's only what I have to go off of. Looking at how other people do it, I boil it down to competency in something. Like, they are really, really competent and so good at it that very few people can match them in their competency. Now, if you want to write a character that is relatable, you have it where they have a gruff exterior, or maybe they don't, subverted reader expectation, and they're like the softest person in the world. But then you kind of move through that. Maybe you start where they're super soft and they end up hard and callous, or vice versa. They are hard and callous at the start, and you move them towards having, a softer exterior for people. It makes them more relatable when you can take them on a journey. So the next question is writing. How can I show a time jump of a few years between chapters? I'm gonna need a drink. By the way, apple cider, just a little bit of apple cider vinegar and water, super great for you. Once you get past like the floaty stuff that's in there, like, it doesn't bother you anymore. I hate time jumps. I'll be straight up with you. I loathe time jumps. And that's because they're not done very well the majority of the time. You typically will see this in newer authors, at least from what I've seen, especially like the poorer examples that I'm pulling from memory. They will do this multiple times, and that's not the best way to go. Mainly because the reader is going to get really confused. A lot happens in a couple of years, right? If I think back to 2 years ago, One, I hadn't started my business. I had just started entertaining the idea of posting my stories on Wattpad. I had no writing process. I had very little confidence in my ability to actually write a good story because I had literally plotted my story to death. And so a lot happened. So if you all of a sudden jump 10 years, then it's like, well, what happened? Well, they grew up and now they're suddenly they're a swordsman, or they're really good with a rifle or a pistol, or they're now uh, um, they're now a spy. Like what what happened in that time span where they suddenly are just good at this thing, because before they weren't. The next problem is that the author will then be like, well, I'm going to give you this super detailed flashback mid chapter just to make it extra confusing for you. And it's annoying. Don't do that. Please do not do that to your readers. It will drive them absolutely insane and just want to throw the book out a window or into a burn pile. Might be a little bit extreme, but making a point here. If you're wanting to do time jumps, you need to set an expectation that makes sense. Okay, so if you have someone who's like, we're going to go with sci-fi example. You have somebody going to the academy, right? They're going to learn, and they're just like, and today was the first day that changed my life. And then 10 years later, and they're like a grizzled commander. Well, what happened? There's character growth, because if they were like this, like whiny, like meh, at the start, and then now they're just like a grumpy, like meh, over here. Something happened, but we as the readers don't know what that is, and it's incredibly frustrating. So if you're going to do it, you need to set the expectation on the front end. Little Johnny joined the academy. Break up the time jumps. Okay, don't have it be 10 years later. Have it be a month in, and then you kind of stay in that for a bit, right? So you do 2 or 3 chapters where you're kind of exploring, and maybe something it shouldn't necessarily be something big, because the readers are going to want to see that. But if you do, the sergeant's like, and today, kids, we get to go do this, and the character's just like, oh my gosh. And then you fast forward 2 or 3 months later, and that character is doing that thing more effectively or better than they did beforehand. Let's say he was just running up a hill. It was just this big steep hill with an incline like this, and they're better at it now, and they're just passing everybody out. You still see character growth. You see physical growth. You see that they are now more competent in that, without having, because like, how many times do you really want to say, and he ran up the hill, and he ran up the hill, and he ran up the hill? It's going to get really repetitive real fast. So you can do those kinds of things in smaller chunks, and then maybe it's like, all right, guys, we're off to war, and you fast forward 5 years later, right? So you've now kind of caught up. So if it's been kind of like this war that's been going on for a long time, then you can kind of get the sense that there's not necessarily a lot of urgency to the war. It's just they're just fighting. So if you cut for 5 years, and all of a sudden you see that he's now in command of a unit, and they're fighting, and they're and you're making it seem like this has just been the monotonous thing. They attack us, we attack them, and back and forth and back and forth. So you're telling the reader, you haven't missed anything. Basically, I've just gotten promoted because I haven't died yet. That sets an entirely different tone for making those types of time jumps. Be purposeful in that, because you really want to make sure that you're not leaving the reader behind in anything that's important. You want to make sure that you're telling the reader you haven't missed anything. He's the last one of the original unit in 5 years, so he's basically promoted because he hasn't died. And they're just kind of like, oh wow. So not only does that show that he's gone through a lot of hard things, he's got to have some demons. He's got to have some guilt. He's got to have some. So you're setting up, you're layering these sets of reader expectations slowly as you go. Whereas if you just said, Johnny's first day at the academy, and then he's a grizzled warrior, and there's like all of this time span in between, and you don't know how he grew from like wimpy kid to suddenly leading a group of men, there's no reader investment. They didn't watch him go through the training. They don't know really his character. You get to show that through those training times. Don't skip those things because you think it's boring. Just make sure that you layer it appropriately. All right. So moving on. That was all of the questions that I had received. So if you guys have any questions right now is a great time to ask, whether it's pertaining to any of the questions that we have already gone over. I have some additional ideas in mind, but I would love to hear from you guys. And I don't bite, I promise. All right, so if you guys bring something up, I will make sure to answer it over there in the comments. Well, I'll answer it here, but I'll acknowledge that it was in the comments. So I'm going to talk a little bit about plot expectations here. This is something that in talking with several of my coaching clients has kind of come up recently, and it was super interesting to kind of to delve a little bit deeper into this, because I wrote the plot donut, which is one of the worksheets that is part of my kind of getting your story started worksheet collection, or whatever you want to call it. And we talked a lot about layering. So she was like, so I don't know whether I just use dialogue and tell how bad the bad people are to the main character, and I don't know whether to do it maybe from the narrator point of view, and the narrator tells the character how bad the bad guys are. And I was like, the answer is no to both of those. What you want to do with the plot is you want to layer it step by step. So one, you need to have your milestones done, because that allows you to plot more effectively, because you're seeing that big picture. The plot is where you kind of zoom in a little bit, and you're looking at some of the other details of like, okay, if so-and-so was related to them, and then that means that I could have this kind of plot twist, which then has these implications. Notice how implications on there is one of the things that I actually listed. Don't have a plot twist for the sake of having a plot twist. So that way readers just go, oh my gosh. It doesn't land, right? You have to be purposeful with it. You have to toy with the reader. You've got to be a little devious. So as you're layering the story, you have to decide, do I want the plot twist to come before the character knows? Or do I want it to be revealed at the same time to the reader and the character? Because you can do it both ways, but you have to layer it. You have to leave breadcrumbs. So the way that you do that is you set some sort of expectation or hint early on in the book. very, very early on in the story. Then I'm trying to think of a good example. All right, I'll go back to using my fan fiction again. So I had a character who is the villain, or one of the villains, and I made a reference to that, and I dropped a very subtle hint. And then as I went through, I dropped little breadcrumbs along the way. I was layering it, right? Until the point it was finally revealed. And then I said something that harkened back to what I hinted at earlier on. So it's now connected those two pieces in a way where the reader is just like, that's what that meant. That's what she meant when she said this. I thought she was talking about this, but it was something completely different, and she was the villain. And that's how you want to do it. Or that's an example of how you can do it. The other way is, and this one's also fun. Again, a little devious, toy with the readers. I had a character that everyone loved, and I had no idea what to do with her because she was a plot convenience. So I was like, all right, I'm going to make her Udar's daughter. And spoiler alert for those who haven't read it, but I also don't link any of my fan fiction stories. If you want to find me at Silverhand19 on Wattpad, you'll find me and all of the stories. And just follow the trail of tears from my followers, and you'll be fine. So I was like, all right, she's going to be his daughter. And I'm going to drop the hints. The readers figured it out before the character did, which was okay, because once they had, it was basically like, bro, she's your daughter. Do you not see it? You really don't see it? Are you just that dumb? And the answer was no. He was just in denial. He didn't want to believe it was true because he had run away and didn't know about her. So there was this angsty expectation, and I have them interact with each other. Like, he's being like this fatherly figure to her in one scene, and all of the characters are just like, oh my gosh, like, he's being the dad that he doesn't know that he's a dad, but he's the dad. And oh my goodness, all of these feels. And it was fantastic, right? But I had laid a big enough breadcrumb where they were able to figure out before the character did. It took a little bit of maneuvering on my part once I realized that they had figured it out, like the same chapter, because I don't want it to make it seem like Udar was incompetent, because he is very competent. He was just blinded by the pain of the past. And so I really had to try and play that up more, so that way he didn't lose his competency. He didn't seem like a complete doofus, but also played together. And that was by forcing the two characters together more. He didn't want anything to do with her. He didn't think that she should be with them when they were traveling north. And they were like, oh no, it'll be fine. And he's just like, and so it forced them into more awkward interactions, and it made the readers cringe the entire time, because they're just like, oh my god, this is. So you can also do that when you're layering the plot. Okay, so you have to balance it, because if the readers figure it out first, you have to have a really, really good reason why the character who's directly like connected with that plot arc doesn't know. Like, it needs to be a really good reason. And it could be, they're separated by, an ocean, and one finds out about it beforehand, but you already know the character over here. And so you're going, oh my gosh, how is this going to work? Like, are they going to meet up? Are they going to, like, what's going to happen? So just keep that in mind as you're layering your plot, because as you're building this foundation and as you're slowly building up the layers, the readers are digging down. Okay. They are trying to discover the truth while you are slowly building up to it as the author. So it's kind of flipped on its head. So you've built all this up, and now they're trying to dig down to figure out where it's at. And when those two meet, that is when you have those mind-blowing plot reveals, plot twists, all of those different kinds of things. So yeah, I mean, that's probably one of my favorite things to do to authors, or to readers, is to torment them a little bit with the different plots. So that was all the questions that I got for this week. Again, if you guys have any questions, I'll keep this running. We have another like 9 minutes. So if you guys just have a general question, or you just want to chat about some of the books or some of the concepts that were described today, if you just want to rant about Aragon, I'm totally game. Just let me know. Actually, Aragon does remind me of something. It's not like a question, obviously, but what are some of your pet, well, I guess it's a question from me to you guys. Like, what would be your biggest pet peeve about other authors' styles of writing? I'm just curious, because like for me, Aragon, in my opinion, just plagiarized Lord of the Rings just enough to not get sued. I mean, the guy's name is Aragon. It's Aragorn. There's like Lake Evenstar. Gee, I wonder who that could have been named after. So it's like originality is really low. Boyne is Dragon. Toothless and Hiccup were better. They're a better duo. Yeah, it just kind of dissolved for me with Aragon. But all right, so doesn't look like we have any more questions. If you guys haven't already, make sure that you go down and you hit subscribe and hit the little bell, so that way you get notified of when I go live. I'm going to actually be scheduling out the live streams, so you guys will actually be able to see those on my homepage and set reminders for it for when they're coming up. Found out about that yesterday. Super excited about it. I'm also going to be having some new video content coming next week. I'm really working on getting the first video of the creating a writing process series up, and it's going to be all about how to schedule and create the foundations for your writing process. So I'm super excited about that. Keep an eye out for that next week. All right, guys. Thank you so much for joining me on the live stream today, and I will see you guys next time. And it's probably going to be one of those things where I can't quite figure out how to turn there it is. All right. Now I will see you guys next time. And if you have any questions, again, make sure put them down in the comments. Take care, guys.